Guys, first regards from here, I'll be talking about whether every single class in Space Marine 2 should have some sort of healing ability. And to talk about this with me, I have brought on Jeficus once again. Now, we made a video talking about Apothecary a few days ago, and the response to that was that a lot of players really want healing in Space Marine 2. They want it on every single class, if not just melee classes. And what do you think about that? How do you feel about the current state of balance with healing in the game?
Well, I think the response to that video was very telling. I think that for the most part, we have a lot of Space Marine 1 veterans in the community who are used to a certain way of playing the game because it just plays significantly different. And when you introduce something like the CHP system, the contested health pool system, you get a scenario where if you're not reacting fast enough and if you're making mistakes all the time, then you're going to run out of HP extremely fast. The Bulwark and the Vanguard are seen as really, really powerful classes because you can kind of just fix those mistakes. But for the most part, there are also mistakes that you just can't recover from, like getting stun locked. I think you would agree.
Oh yeah, stun locks are a huge issue in Space Marine 2. I feel like Space Marine 2 has a lot of feels bad mechanics in it, and that's a huge portion of why people want healing so badly in this game for a lot of the classes. Now, like you said with the Bulwark and Vanguard, these classes are very powerful. They have global heals for your team, and Assault has none. He is one of the other melee classes. Assault has been maligned since the game came out. A lot of players, they really want Assault to have some form of healing. Now, for a lot of veteran players, they would say like, oh, no class needs healing in this game, just get good, but I simply don't think that is where Space Marine 2's player base is majority at, because at some point, you do have to base your game balancing off of where like the majority of the community is. I put out a community post the other day, about 21,000 people voted in it, 53% said yes, there should be healing for all classes, 14% said only melee classes, and 33% said no. Now, obviously, 21,000 people is not all of Space Marine 2's player base, but it's a pretty significant portion of people, and it really is quite telling as to like what players want in Space Marine 2 currently and how they feel about the game balance, because like you said, I don't think any player in this game likes getting bopped around by a stun lock, and getting knocked over, losing all of your CHP already feels bad for the CHP system in the game, and having no healing options after that outside of things like stims, it feels terrible. Like, you're a brand new player, you're gonna get knocked around by
Right.
like 3 lictors and be like, oh, why the fuck would I ever play Absolute ever again? So I'm curious what you think about that.
I think a lot of it does really come back to game feel, and I think that for the most part, CHP has kind of just failed as a system for game feel in general. I think a lot of players would just prefer if you would basically recover like 5% HP from Majoris execution in the middle of combat or after combat, whatever it is, for every class, not just Assault, not just Vanguard, not just the Bulwark, basically every class in the game having its own form of sustainability. Now, if you were to implement a system like that, then you'd probably have to remove CHP altogether as the game's like primary recovery system. But I think it could certainly be done. Other things that could be done to make healing more readily available for people, obviously in absolute difficulty, you only run into a med kit, once every 5 business days. But you could do things like make the med kits group wide. Whenever someone in the party picks one up, everyone in the party gets their own stim. That way you can basically counter like stim hogging, for example, along with other things like that. Basically tweaking the sandbox in a way where you move away from CHP as the game's primary means of recovering HP to more passive HP recovery over time.
I feel like passive HP recovery would feel a lot better for a lot of players. Like you said, CHP in the game does feel kind of broken. In some ways, it is literally broken because Saber Interactive, it did say before that like the whole range taking priority for your HP recovery was unintentional. It was a bug, and they left it in the game because players just got used to it. That's kind of like a pretty much self-admitted fundamental failing of your CHP recovery system. When they were trying to fix up the assault or buff him, they gave him the Bulwark's perk Advanced Conditioning as a perk for himself called Defense Mechanism. This perk would give you a 50% slower CHP fade. So a lot of the issues in Space Marine 2 do come down to like the contested health just being a broken system. Stun locks really exacerbate that because let's say you get knocked around by 3
Oh, yeah.
lictors and you're stuck in a spot, you're watching your entire white CHP bar just drain. And if you're a player that, like, let's say, reasonably, if you are a new player and you have a chain sword in your hand and you're like, okay, I want to get my HP back. What am I going to do to the guy? Am I going to shoot him in the head with my heavy bolt pistol, get all my HP back, or am I like whack him with my chain sword? The natural player inclination would be whack him with my chain sword because that's how like 95% of video games work. But that's broken in Space Marine 2. So what they experience is they get their HP robbed from them during a stun lock. They don't shoot the guy, which is what you're supposed to do because the gameplay mechanic is broken, and they whack him with the chainsword, and they get shot in the face again because enemies in Space Marine 2 will continue shooting you in melee. They die, they hate the game, they think the game needs healing, and that's a totally valid response to what just happened to them, and I feel that's what a lot of players have experienced in Space Marine 2. So having a fundamental rebalancing of CHP recovery on top of just a general game rebalancing would probably do a lot for Space Marine 2. Now, whether or not we'll see that in this game, I'm not so sure about. They did put out that CHP poll a while back. I'm curious what you thought about that.
Yeah, it seems like CHP is going to be sticking around for the foreseeable future, but for Space Marine 3, I could see a complete rebalancing of the system. Right now, the things that get you killed in Space Marine 2 are stun locks and big nukes. Basically, things that would take you from 100% HP to 25% HP, or from 25% HP to just dead. And I could see a complete rebalancing of damage output from the mobs or the enemies in the game, basically lowering everything across the board with the introduction of just player healing for every class. I think that would be a pretty fun sandbox to play in. It would turn each game more into a war of attrition rather than like these frustrating spikes where you just get nuked out of nowhere or seemingly unexpectedly. And yeah, like you said, I don't think it's coming for Space Marine 2, but it's something that Saber and Focus really need to be honed in on for Space Marine 3, because we all want Space Marine 3 to be the best possible sandbox or the best feeling sandbox it can possibly be.
That is true. Space Marine 3 really needs to be like the 40K game. I do think that's where like they're pushing most of their budget and stuff like that. I feel like Space Marine 2 is more so of a training ground for that game in a lot of ways because they saw the success of this game. They were like, all right, this game made a ton of money. We gotta continue supporting this game in like a crazy way, or we just make a brand new game and make that the premier live service. So a lot of the mechanics in this one, like the CHP, like the stun locks, even like the grabs will take 90% of your HP. I feel like these won't be in Space Marine 3. They're gonna be worked around a bit in Space Marine 2, but Space Marine 2 devs, it's probably a bit of a skeleton crew on this game at times, and they just don't have the resources or time or like overhead authority to say, all right, we're going to fix all these systems like tomorrow. Hot fixes in Space Marine 2 come out at a very slow pace. And I just think as far as CHP recovery goes, they did talk about reworking it at some point. And like you said, these massive damage nukes just rob you of HP versus like a war of attrition. I feel like players just like war of attrition more in general because losing all of your HP instantaneously is one of the worst feeling mechanics in games for a lot of players.
Yeah.
Especially on top of parry systems. And Space Marine 2 is a parry system that only works like 90% of the time due to a parry phase bug that has been in the game since the launch, where you do your parry, the attack phases through your parry here, you take no damage, but you're locked in the animation, and you get no perfect parry, you get no adrenaline surge charge, and you might just get stun locked because your guy's locked in the animation. That's been in the game since launch. That makes this healing problem feel even worse. There are a lot of feels bad mechanics that are just not told to you in the game, where things like CHP recovery are based on ranged weapons versus melee weapons. They are based on the direct damage of the ranged weapon you've used. So if you shoot a guy in the head, you'll get back more CHP than if you shot him in the body. And on top of that, CHP recovery, the base delay of the CHP recovery in this game is very unforgiving. Like, you
Oh
really
yeah.
have to know what you are doing. You have to know exactly like, okay, I'm gonna get this much back from this enemy. I have to shoot this Majoris in the head right now, or I will die. So if you're a brand new player, you'll just get fucked, and it's a pretty unfun mechanic to play against. And I feel like you said, I don't know if we should remove the CHP recovery entirely, but a rebalance on top of passive healing. I think that's what a lot of players actually want. Do you think that would be good for the game? Because I feel it'd be very controversial, because a lot of players, they don't want healing in this game. It's not like an insignificant portion that just want to have it like kept to the Bulwark and Vanguard, or want no healing whatsoever. But I do feel like there's a tremendous amount of people who just want to have healing on all classes no matter what. So is that something you would want to see?
Well, I personally wouldn't want to see both CHP and self healing for all classes exist in the same sandbox. I feel like that would remove a lot of the challenge in the game, unless they just increase the difficulty of Absolute even more and just add way more things to deal with, or like increase the difficulty of stratagems even more, which I feel like would not be a great idea because we're already in a pretty good sandbox just in general, especially when you consider stratagem difficulty. But I would want to see them remove CHP and then add this self healing for all classes, and then use armor as your go to for like in combat recovery. More ways to recover armor in combat so that you could mitigate a lot of these things, and maybe even making you immune to a lot of things like stun locks when you have armor. And so you're recovering more of it, and you're able to play much more fluidly in the middle of combat, as long as you're doing all the things that you need to be doing.
That's a good thing to bring up there for like having armor be more worthwhile. I mean, armor is already very strong in Space Marine 2, but you have to know how to properly utilize it. And for like
Mhm.
a normal player, if you're just going around, like your armor feels like paper mache. It felt worse at launch than it does now, but still, it is a huge armor management game in a lot of cases. There are also like mechanics in the game that are simply not told to you at all. Things like damage reduction is hardly explained. The lower your HP gets in Space Marine 2, the higher base damage reduction you get up to a certain point. So, like,
Mhm.
the first sniper shot will take 70% of your HP down, and the next sniper shot will not even one-shot you, which is because you have that fat damage reduction at low HP. The whole point is that you're fighting like your life is on the line, you're on the edge, and that works pretty well in the campaign, which the game was originally designed around, where you have like Titus's healing ability, or you have the original like balance of the game where minors and stuff like that, there just were not as many of them, there were not as many majoris. But now the game is in a state where there are way more enemies now than ever. Triple lictors were unheard of when the game first came out, and the
Right.
operations, and you can definitely feel now that like stun locks are way more of an issue, because you're simply fighting more enemies than the initial gameplay was intended for, which is why the whole joke is like, oh, lictors hunt alone. Well, Titus was completely wrong, because now there's three of them, or in siege mode now there's like 40 of them. And having that come up to you constantly, stun lock you, you can definitely see like the no knockback perks have kind of become mandatory for a lot of solo classes and stuff like that, because without them, there are situations where you just get ping pong and you instantly die. And that, combined with this horrible CHP recovery system and the lack of healing for like what the majority of the classes in the game, it feels bad for new players. Plain and simple, it feels
Yeah.
terrible, and it's has a pretty huge learning curve on that. There are a lot of knowledge checks in the game, and knowledge checks are good for a game, but this is also ever present on like over half the difficulties in the game, which I don't think is okay personally, because I do think at some point a game should listen to the majority of its player base, and because like you're making a game for the players of your game. If the majority of the players are not in like the top 10%, not in the top 30%, or even 1% of players, you can't be balancing everything in the game around them. Obviously, difficulty options do kind of mitigate that a little bit, but the lower difficulty options in Space Marine 2, I talked about this a little bit before, is that lower difficulty options, they don't have the proper spawns that players want in a lot of cases. A lot of players are fine with fighting triple lictors. They are fine with fighting like 100 Majoris warriors. They just don't like the damage values and HP values these enemies have on absolute difficulty. They want to fight the same spawns and fight them in a bit of an easier sandbox. And I think that's totally fine. I think that's why normal siege mode is very fun for a lot of players outside of the bugs. And I'm curious what you think about that portion of the game.
Well, I think that I was actually just thinking right now, the Space Marine 2 is one of those co-op horde games that doesn't really have like checkpoints. I guess you do, because every now and like playing through a mission, you run into an ammo crate, right? And your team is able to refresh all of its ammo. But I was thinking about what they do in Darktide with the medical servitors and how they use those as these soft checkpoints throughout a mission or a level, basically so that the entire team can just do a complete health restore. And we don't really see that in Space Marine 2. They kind of use the lack of healing in absolute difficulty almost as an artificial way to make the game mode a bit harder. And now I'm kind of thinking like, well, what if they just, whenever you have an ammo crate, you also have like a med kit crate right next to it, just so that the entire team can just guaranteed loot a med stim, at least one from that med kit crate, and you would basically have these soft checkpoints throughout the level that already technically exist in the form of ammo, but why hoard the healing resources as well? You know?
That's actually a pretty good point. Like healing resources being lowered in absolute, you actually notice it on solo more than you notice it in the main game, because currently it was like one stim at the ammo crate. If you were playing true solo, or if it's even solo with bots, you don't find any stim at the ammo crates. It is completely player dependent, which is pretty interesting. It's one of like the hardest things for a lot of players when absolute first came out to actually true solo it. At some point you do want to have like a healing economy in the game, have like some restrictions, because otherwise you're just walking through the map. But giving it like making it, you have to make it feel good. You want players to feel like they're having fun, and you want to give every single player of every skill level the option for fun. So maybe saying previously where it's like, okay, let's take healing perks off of Bulwark and Vanguard. Maybe that's not the option. Maybe just give the Bulwark and Vanguard more choices for their like outside of healing perks. Like I feel that Saber just does not properly think outside the box in a lot of cases on how far they can actually take the perk trees in this game. We talked about the Apothecary previously. A lot of players want Apothecary class in the game, or players want healing on the Assault class. I think if we are to see like new healing perks added to Space Marine 2, it will be first on the Assault class, and then probably an Apothecary if they ever add that. And those will be like the primary healing systems. I don't know if we'll ever see like a full passive healing system in Space Marine 2, because it would just be too hard to balance around for Saber and their intended balance of the game currently, because if they haven't added it by now, I doubt they ever will. But as far as what the player base wants, I think a happy middle ground would just be like a global heal option for every single melee class, because right now 2 out of 3 have them, and Assault is just left behind, and most people consider Assault the weakest class currently, including me. So
yeah, I would definitely like to see them implement something before Space Marine 3 comes out, because I want to see them experiment with it. I want to see what the community feedback or reception is to adding things like, okay, hey, Assault, here you go, here's your own healing. Apothecary class, release, boom, this is your team's dedicated healer or healer class. Like, I want to see how people respond to having all the healing in the game. Because I think there is such a thing as, making the game too easy at every level. But that's just me.
I mean, I'm with you there, but I also know that, like, I don't consume games the same way as every other player would, and I don't speak for the entire community, which is why I want to ask the comments section below, what do you guys think of a fundamental rebalancing on HP recovery in the game? Would you like to see Assault have a healing perk? Would you like to see HP recovery delayed to be a baseline increase? And how do you feel about stun locks? Let us know in the comments below. And Jeficus, thank you for coming on today and talking about this with me. If you guys have not checked out Jeficus, look at his channel in the comments section. Not comment section. Actually, you know what? I'll put it in the comments section too, and the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.